Over the past several patches in Diablo 2, the Assassin has gotten a lot of love, and they finally made most of this available in single player with patch 2.7. So it's about time we update the build guides for what are fairly major improvements to the character, with today's focus being the Lightning Trapper, which, with the buffs originally released online in 2.6 and finally converted to offline in 2.7, it is a fairly tough A tier, if not sometimes S tier build now, and not just as a starter. That said, starting out from scratch, the build pretty much follows the same rules as before. If you go lightning early, you will struggle, since fire is better in normal, but by mid-nightmare you'll start packing enough punch with lightning and of course death sentry to handle pretty much anything outside of lightning immunes. Though, after that is when things start to change, since previously we had no way to deal with that on traps short of fire blast or martial arts, and even with the original Sunder effect in 2.5, it was not enough of an impact to make it viable to farm areas with lightning immunes in general. But 2.6 changed that online, and 2.7 brought it to single player, by allowing your traps to use your minus resist effects, and in 2.7 they shored this up a little bit by including damage improvements from items like Rainbow Facets and Griffin's Eye to the equation. So now we not only can deal with those pesky lightning immunes with the right gear, but we can also fairly significantly bump up the damage of the traps themselves. Now, until you get that Sunder charm, you pretty much want to continue to follow the old guides, which I'll link both in the description as well as one in those little card pop-ups in the top right. But where the build changes is whenever you get to the mid-game gear as well as the end-game gear, since there are a lot more systems you can exploit now to ramp up your damage. Starting in the mid-game, which you can use even before you get a Sunder, the big winner on gear is Crescent Moon, generally thrown into a one-handed sword or axe of your choice. If you're only going to use it for this build, you can get away with farming a low requirement one-hander in normal and holding on to it with 3 sockets, of course. So there's no need to throw it in a phase blade like I have here unless you're planning to share it with other builds. Though admittedly having it in a phase blade will improve your trap laying speed, at the cost of a lot of dexterity. But this gives you a little bit of minus lightning resist on your traps, which will greatly improve your kill speed on high resist but non-immune enemies. And once you do get that Sunder charm, all lightning immunes will fall into that category because it sets them to 95%. Combine this with a spirit and you have a basic setup that will handle even areas with immunes. It will be kind of decent, but not as blazingly fast as a sorceress or hammered in with similar level gear. That's because their curve peaks out much earlier in the gear cycle. The thing is, with the changes, the Trapsin closes ground now rather than flatlining early. So as we get into the endgame gear, which is shockingly similar to that of an Infinity Nova sorceress, the fact that we can go after multiple targets at once from range and even around corners that you can't see the enemies from gives us a lot of utility that other classes simply can't match, which more than makes up for being marginally slower on the crowd kills, since we never have to get close and we don't even have to focus on enemies in our immediate area, but if they do get close to us, they die even faster. This is because the endgame gear for the Lightning Trapsin basically boils down to 3 pieces of gear: a Sunder charm, which pretty much is a given for any elemental build now, a self-wielded Infinity, which provides a massive drop in enemy lightning resist on the weapon itself, as well as providing Conviction for dealing even better with any enemy that gets close, and of course Griffin's Eye, which provides a lightning damage boost as well as a drop in enemy lightning resist. The only alternative to this is the Rainbow Facet Blade, like what I have over here for the fire build we'll be covering soon. And we combine it with Spirit, which will be better against some targets but less effective against high resist targets due to the 20% or higher difference between Infinity and Rainbow Facet Blades when it comes to minus resist. The reason it is better against some targets though is because that 30% boost to damage after synergies, making it more effective against lower resist enemies that are being pinged by both your Conviction and the minus lightning resist, dropping it to the floor, which is negative 100%. Armor-wise, people will generally either go Enigma for teleport, Coat of Arms for resist, or possibly sneak in some socketed armor or even Arcane's Valor for plus skills in a single facet. But overall, Enigma will be the pick for farming outside of areas with Gloams and Beetles. As far as the rest of our gear, it's straight up plus skills with Stones of Jordan, Arachnid's Mesh, and a skill amulet of your choice, though getting some resist here is nice as well in the form of Mara's or a good rare, since Fade will only take us so far. Gloves are a bit of a mixed choice. If you're using Enigma, Mage Fist or Trangs are a good way to eke out some faster casts and better frames, especially when combined with an Assassin Caster amulet. If you're going for a non-teleport setup though, gloves with resist and attack speed will be the way to go, since it improves your trap laying speed as well, and it gives you resist, which if you get resist gloves, it's of course going to give you those, and it makes you survive much better. Now, skills for the build are fairly standard. You grab Fade for sure for the resists, and if you want them, you can take a point in something like Mind Blast or Cloak of Shadows to help you out with the hardcore and tough areas kind of situation, but your main focus is going to be on the left side of the trap tree, with Shockweb, Charge Bolt Sentry, and Lightning Sentry being the big investments, and then your leftover points going to Fire Blast and Death Sentry. Which one of these two you invest in more will depend on your personal preference, though I prefer 1 point in Death Sentry until I get Fire Blast to level 18, and only after that taking Death Sentry up to max. This is both for progression reasons prior to getting endgame gear, but also even with transferred gear, getting Fire Blast to 18 makes your Shockweb hit more locations, which benefits from the next hit delay change in 2.7, and also gives your Death Sentry more charges, meaning it needs to be recast less often. And each of these traps also serves a purpose. As we said, Fire Blast being a spammable fire damage source for you to use before you get Infinity deals a small AoE and helps you deal with those lightning immunes, but ends up being generally ignored in endgame gear. Shockweb is now a semi-reasonable addition to your setup, even in multiplayer games now, due to the decoupling of next hit delay. You can stack it on, and each cast will deal damage. It's not game-breaking or overly compelling, but I like dropping it out for some extra bits of damage, usually on your left click so you never accidentally hit with the Infinity, which I run in an Ethereal Scythe for style. Charged bolt traps were never the worst thing ever, but now can actually be used to effectively clean up more spread out trash. Though against tougher and bigger targets, they usually cannot clump enough of their bolts on a single target due to being automated and stationary, which is the main reason they can't quite punch as hard as charged bolt sorceresses or charged strike Amazons. Lightning Sentry is the main thing you'll be casting, especially when fully geared, since it is your quickest way to drop a target, and on lower player counts, they'll just drop everything. Though they do fire in a straight line, so tend to be a little slower at dealing with stuff like fallen camps, flares, or other similar swarm everywhere types of enemies, unless you combine it with other traps like Charge Bolt for direct hits, or Death Sentry for reactionary kills. And finally, speaking of Death Sentry, a trap that pretty much any self-respecting assassin will use in PvM, just drop one of these mixed in with your normal killing traps or even killing skill, and it will handle any crowd clearing you need. The classic 3 and 2 setup isn't quite as justified now though, since the improvements to traps. They almost exclusively do 4 main traps and 1 Death Sentry now, thanks to not having to buffer against Death Sentry waiting for a corpse, thanks to faster main trap kills. Previously, the build was focused pretty much solely on being a super effective starter build that kind of capped out, and that was that. But with the changes over the last 2 patches, it has gotten itself into a place where all the lightning traps and skills are now useful in one situation or another, and while it's still not an Infinity Nova Shield Sorceress, it is competitive and capable and fun. And it is extremely disappointing that it got this, while unfortunately being overshadowed by the Mosaic Assassin, and frankly I think it deserves your attention if you're just not into that melee lifestyle or build-breaking items. So do you like the changes to the Lightning Trapsins, or are you more of a fan of the other Trapper changes? Mention it down below, and is standard on YouTube. If you found this helpful, hit that like and sub button for more gaming news, reviews, and guides.